Hey guys, Mustached. Tom here to review Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I will be going in as objectively as possible. Now, when I was seeing the trailers for this movie, boy oh boy, did these trailers play consistently and a lot more than a lot of movies I have seen in quite some time. They have dumped quite a few monies on the marketing on this one. But I digress. Now, it was with the success of the previous installment and sort of bringing a more goodwill back into the Ghostbusters franchise that I was willing to go in and say, okay, they're clearly trying to bring back the old with the new in a way that rings a more positive message to the movies moving forward. So let's see how they follow that up here this time around. With that in mind, the movie begins with a quote about how the world will end based on some guy or whatever. And then we cut to 1904, or in the past, where these men are gallivanting into this building and they see this door and it's like freezing up barely, and they make their way inside where they see a bunch of other people are frozen over completely. One of them begins to touch this orb, in which all the frozen figures in said room begin to shatter. Now, with that being established, I think, and I could be wrong, it's been a long time since I've seen previous Ghostbusters movies, and even including the first one, but I don't know if the previous ghosts had gotten a kill count on them before. Now again, that could be the case. I think I'm trying to remember if the first one did. There might have been a few instances where there might have been close instances, but this is like a very clear and cut, you know, these people are essentially dead, and there is, in fact, a kill count. So the movie here, pretty early on, is establishing that it's going for a significantly darker tone. Now, I say this because, of course, the Ghostbusters franchise as an entirety has always been slightly more on the goofy side, comedy sort of prevailing over the action. And this movie, and I'm trying to remember even the previous movie, and I'm struggling to remember how much was comedy versus action per se, but definitely in this movie, it definitely feels like the more dramatization areas or elements were more prioritized over the comedy. And I suppose that is a fair criticism to point out if what you were expecting was something a lot more comedic. I mean, yeah, there are elements in this movie that try to come off as comedic, primarily a significantly, there is a comic relief character who ends up sort of simultaneously ends up being a main protagonist or crucial to the plot, essentially. So we'll get to that and how that's dealt with. So there is a few steps to get to that point, though. So let's go in sequential order, rather. Anyways, after this little flashback, we cut to the present day where our Ghostbusters are chasing a dragon ghost through the town, and they are not having a good old time. The daughter seems to be our focus character for this movie, that being Phoebe. Somewhat so that I remembered to write down her name and not the son's name, who's 18. I think he had a lot more focus in the previous movie, so I'm inclined to think that it's a bit fair to give her some room to see what her deal is. If the previous installment, again, I might even have to rewatch it. I'm pretty sure there was a lot more focus on him than her, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so Trevor, that being the son in this case, ends up trying to use this little mini car, this remote control car that has the proton pack in it. They have a drone as well that the mom uses later on in this chase sequence where they finally capture it, but the amount of damage that they cause in order to capture this ghost is quite significant, so much so that after they do capture it successfully, they get called in by the mayor, in which he brings up Ghostbusters 2 incident of the Lady Liberty, that being when the Ghostbusters were moving it back to its original location. So we see on the news how Egon's will, that being the Ghostbuster that, the one that passed away unfortunately, passed on his funds over to Winston to keep up the funds of the Ghostbusters. So there is a heavy criticism as well with the daughter being 15 and being able to be on the field. This is heavily criticized by the mayor, saying how we don't let, essentially, kids become police officers, we don't let them drink, we don't let them do this and that and the other thing. And it is an interesting dynamic because out of all the jobs, that it literally doesn't apply to acting, which is, this, in a meta sense, that's the opposite of truth. It's the furthest thing from, is that you could literally just have a baby in a movie and that's fine. But yeah, children actors are a thing that can be present, which is, historically just been a thing, and there's been a long-standing bit about how a lot of children actors aren't great, but then once in a blue moon you get those few good children actors here and there, blah blah blah, and we get back to here. So it's interesting to think about that perspective of what types of jobs rather certain individuals can have despite their age. So it is something to think about when coming across, I suppose, this argument. Anyway, we get back to the base, which is the previous fire base. They're the vintage base of the Ghostbusters. And the mom wants to sort of run the course, So she's playing the field of, well, wait a few years, and tells the stepdad, in this case, the previous teacher here, now in the stepdad role, to essentially put his foot down, and he never feels comfortable doing it for a good majority of the movie, quite frankly. At any rate, we get to see the parents sort of argue back and forth about what to do, and we cut to Ray, who is now sort of a reader of old, potentially possessed or not possessed items, and there's this old woman who's talking about some stuff about this watch or whatever. It's sort of like a side gag or whatever. And we quickly see how much the meta of the movie makes its way in, with Booking.com being mentioned as our lovely sponsor for this entire movie. I mean, the commercials even are of that, bringing that up quite often. That is the most common trailer I have seen, or advertisement more so, I suppose, for that website. Nonetheless, we see Phoebe talking with, I believe his name was what was it? It was pay something. His partner in crime, or her partner in crime, rather. A podcast. Wow, I was like struggling to like remember his name or his code name, I suppose. I don't know if that's his real name. That was bizarre. Anyway, so he's like showing her around, and they see the mini marshmallow creatures just doing some various hijinks, and I guess this is like product placement because that thing is still our icon outside of the ghastly ghost guy that consumes food. At any rate, the entire building begins to shake. And they get some sass from the original Janine, who is still there, still giving it to him in her own way. But as we see Trevor begin to head upstairs, he begins to see this green goo from the ceiling, and he's trying to like, oh, I need assistance, but the mom's like, you're grown up now, since he seems to be insisting on it. She's like, go figure it out. So he's like, oh, okay. So he heads up there, runs into Gassler. I believe that's his name anyway. I could be wrong, but whatever. And of course, it is unsuccessful, and it remains to be unsuccessful throughout the entire movie. But Ray smiles when he sees the remaining Ghostbusters head out, including Trevor, but unfortunately Phoebe's left behind. So she heads out to do her own thing. She begins to play chess. Essentially, originally seems to be by herself, but she's quickly joined by some ghost. This ghost plays a vital role in this movie, it would appear. Her name is Melody. So they have a little convo while playing chess, and the ghost beats her twice. And she mentions, or Phoebe probes the questions about what's worst about being a ghost and what's best about being a ghost. The best being, or the worst being the first question, being that she will remain that age forever, and the best being that she can poof whenever she feels like it, I suppose. But she tries to play it off as not being afraid and kind of vaguing this sort of relationship. And there does seem to be a deep friendship that seems to unfold between this ghost and herself, even within this scene. At any rate, we cut to Winston. Excuse me. Getting over himself, all ready to head over to the base. And once they're shown the issues that their family base is having, he brings them over to their secondary base where they have much more room and capture devices and tech. Trevor bumps into Lucky. She was also in the previous movie. She plays a slightly smaller role here, but I digress. So they show how the ghosts are being contained, how ghosts can be separated from objects, all of this cool technology and whatnot. After the fact, we cut to the dad coming back to the scene, trying to give Phoebe a bit of a pep talk in the waiting, but he doesn't quite land it, unfortunately. Nonetheless, they get called away once more, and Phoebe heads out once again. So again, being sort of the odd one out in this job. We see from the perspective back at the other base, the secondary base, that the intern there gets his hand frozen off, or not off, but frozen. And Phoebe goes on about talking to Melody some more here. So they're building up their bond throughout these little sequences here. She heads over to their main capturing device, trying to figure out what's going on. And we get to see how she has a object that sort of lingers with her, this match that she has. And she is working, as it would turn out, for a higher ghost power. Now, I will say, this is where I would take a criticism, is that we don't see much of this character who I'll note later, the one at the bottom of the poster, our main demon guy. I will note that one of the criticisms that I personally had, or I have, is that we don't really see how he's going to convince her to go pass on, I suppose. I mean, that's sort of what she's leading up to wanting, as it would turn out. So, their dynamic just doesn't feel quite fully established here. So, it does feel like, again, since this is such a core part of the movie, that this part probably should have been established. At any rate, Trevor sees the fat ghost again. Blah blah blah. The gimmick continues. So we can see that the Freeze ghost, as I'll call him for now until he gets his official name later on, is able to manipulate other ghosts in such a way, though again, it's always told to us and but still kept rather vague about how he does that. So they bring in the guy who sold them the orb, or MacGuffin, aka. So they get Venkman, our resident original Ghostbuster, to ask him some questions. He sees once a pen is thrown at him that the fire begins to move behind him, and that sort of prompts a lot more pen throwing from Venkman to this, who I'll call the fire guy. And if you're having trouble, he's the one beneath the mom on the right side of the poster with the little light on his hand there. At any rate, we then see that our guy here, he's sort of, again, our comic relief, but again, he's supposed to now come across as our hero, too. The one that will help the Ghostbusters stop this whole frozen thing. So, it does come across as very flat, and it does even feel extremely rushed. From he feels like he's completely inexperienced to later on in the movie where he suddenly is able to redirect an entire ghost blast. It's like, I thought he could only control fire. I guess the plasma energy stuff that comes from the Ghostbusters emits flames too. I'm assuming it must then. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff with Phoebe heading out, and she's once again pulled in by our Melody, who again is working for the higher up ghost, tricks her into heading out of her own body. She's then possessed by the bigger ghost. While that's going on, more information about said ghost is finally beginning to sort of preset as some of the others are investigating the sort of legend of what this creature is. So we learn its official name is Garaka. So Garaka is our frost ghost here, and he makes his way, upping his kill count by another one by freezing some guy looking for the, yes, Fire Master, as it's directly said in the movie. That's what he's called eventually. To hunt him down and kill him and make sure that Garaka can pursue global saturation, or, ghost takeover, I guess, is pretty generic, but whatever. And the Ghostbusters see that once they are face to face with one Garaka, that their proton packs aren't having a lot of luck or, effect on him. And it would appear that their gear isn't properly equipped with the right material, essentially, to get the job done. Phoebe, being among them, was prompted to, seeing how this was all coming together, made adjustments to her own pack to have it so it's made from a different material, one that, from the legends that she was told about, made to her very own pack, so that it would be significantly different and give them the vantage point, hopefully, when things hit the fan. And indeed they do, as we see even in the trailers when the beach begins to freeze over, and the freezing spreads and spreads and spreads. So their building is one of the last areas to get frozen over, or get close to it. And I, for convenience sake, a little bit here. But anyways, like I said, the Fire Master had barely any sort of training or prep for this, as the Ghostbusters are all pinned, even including Phoebe. She was blasting him successfully a few times there, but then even her weapon began to get frozen over, and when all hope seemed lost, Fire Master comes back down to give a big old assist, much so enough to free everyone else. He sends like a fireball at Garaka there, giving everyone the free space to hook up to Phoebe's gun instead of multi-blasting, which they've done in the past, but we're going for a family pull-in with the fireball, with the fire thing being the other thing that's like attaching him, while some of the others reopen the capture device that's down there in their basement, essentially pulling him back in once he's trapped like this. Once they do so, of course the ice begins to melt, and once more the people know that this was somehow, they know that this was a deal that was dealt by the Ghostbusters, so they're already at their base and already applauding. The mayor's there, ready to lambast them again, but he is overwhelmed by one simple question by the media, and once he's in the spotlight, he kind of folds immediately into saying, "Oh yeah, we need the Ghostbusters," all of a sudden, "Oh yeah, geez." And, yep. Though, we do see that the dragon ghost from the beginning of the movie and the fat ghost also escape. So, they head back out. The last bit, they allow Trevor to drive the vehicle to sort of land his arc, I guess. And, yeah. They head off, and then there's an after credit sequence. Yes, I said that correctly. An after credit sequence when the little puff marshmallows they're all over the place, or they're collectively doing something or rather. So, we'll see if this movie is successful, maybe we'll get a new trilogy out of it. Who knows? Anyways, that is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And like I said, I think that the comedy falls a bit flatter here. I think the gimmick with the Fire Master definitely comes across as not only rushed, but very flat on top of being rushed. It seems like they were trying to do two different things with him, that being this whole Fire Master thing, and then also him being a comic relief character. I think when they layered that on top of each other, that's where the issues with this character sort of pretty much hit its ultimate pinpoint conclusion. And the reason I say this is because he's such a vital role into saving the Ghostbusters, and I think that level of saving people usually plays off more typically in a more, well, just generic sort of heroic fashion. But here, again, not only is he doubled on that, the comic relief, but rushed comic relief on top of those two things. Like, again, he was like doing the little fire movements, and then all of a sudden, like abruptly, he can just shoot a fireball. It's like, the pacing of this didn't land at all. Like, it's so weird. It's simultaneously like he's a vital character and simultaneously a side character. I have never seen this in stories like this before, and maybe this might be a consequence of the oversaturation of characters this time around, and trying to figure out where some of them fit in. So yeah, it definitely comes across as definitely way shallower in this regard for even the previous installment of the Ghostbusters. Bizarrely, despite mocking Ghostbusters 2, I think this might actually be worse than Ghostbusters 2. I don't know. Because again, I don't remember a lot about Ghostbusters 2, but man, does this have a lot of pacing issues. And again, the focus in which could be a lot more focused on this whole ghost aspect of the ghost being an important character as well, and her portraying Phoebe. That dynamic too as well also could be expanded upon without that. Again, the pacing just comes across as more rushed, not as well developed. How characters sort of come back into the fold, or I guess come back into the fold. Maybe, again, they could have played a much minor role or been completely cut. Like, I think, honestly, the whole second base thing, I think a lot of that could have been cut, quite frankly, from this movie. Because I'm trying to think of, like, how can you tighten this script up? And that's like, okay, so they're having trouble with their current base. Maybe, it's tough because the way they almost written themselves into a corner. It does feel like, when I'm thinking about it, it's like, yeah, the Ghostbusters were always packing in their ghost in this one place, and now it's filling up. It's like, yeah, it does feel like that needs to be acknowledged in terms of space. You probably would feel like you would need a secondary base with more facilities to hold the ghost, or more so probably help them move on, which feels like a better prompting. I feel like that should have been the focus. I feel like with the acknowledgement of, like, they're just trapping all of these ghosts, I think they could have simultaneously sort of, and I know this sounds weird, criticized the original Ghostbusters while sort of moving in a direction that could benefit the Ghostbusters as well, simultaneously, as like, maybe there is a better way to capture ghosts, or more so, put them in a place that's better, instead of, again, placing them all in this one location. Again, I think that could have actually been the focus of the movie, instead of all these little parts. The Fire Master bit, I think we could have cut that character completely. I don't think we need him, quite frankly. Cut that character completely. Have Phoebe still figure out the better device thing. Have that be the, and then she kind of passes on that knowledge. Then they all, eventually get on board with it. I don't know, something to sort of, again, tighten it up while sort of keeping some of the elements that seem to be prevalent in this movie, is trying to how I'm going about how I would salvage this movie, because I do think that there are certain elements that do work here, but I do think that the overbloatedness of this movie is what really holds it back from being a great movie. So, I feel like this is either a 4 or 5 out of 10, quite frankly. And that is primarily due to the bloated pacing, rushing, all of these issues sort of, clumping in together for this movie. So, yeah, that is my review for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And if you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. And want to join to my petition to help out small YouTubers. Second, to my PayPal, where you can help support me directly. And third, to my Discord, where you can join, collab, shill, do all that cool stuff for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.